Hello, Bunny YouTube channel.
All right, let's kick off this explainer with a seriously mind-blowing piece of history. Picture this. It's 15th century Europe, and the medical community is convinced they finally hit the jackpot. They found an absolute miracle cure. Patients are desperately seeking relief for severe ailments. We're talking epilepsy, uncontrollable bleeding, intense bruising, even just your everyday nausea. And what was this premium, highly sought-after remedy? Ground-up human flesh. Yeah, you heard that right. Europeans were avidly consuming pulverized human mummies as a staple, everyday medicine.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking the complex history of cannibalism. We're going to completely demystify a deeply misunderstood topic, one that spans vast continents, stretches across centuries, and is actually driven by some surprisingly relatable human motivations. It is a whole lot more nuanced than just the scary stories you see in movies, and the evidence we're about to walk through is going to prove exactly why.
To get the full picture, we'll be covering the European mummy craze, coining the word cannibal, survival and cultural norms, filial cannibalism in China, funerary rites in New Guinea, and finally, bringing it all together into a complex history. Let's jump right in.
Section 1. The European mummy craze. We're starting right at the peak of a frankly bizarre 15th century obsession. The sheer versatility of this gruesome medicine is just wild. This brown powder could literally be mixed into your evening drink, made into a topical salve, or, if you were feeling bold, eaten straight up off a spoon. Initially, merchants supplied this massive craze by looting ancient mummies directly from Egyptian tombs. But as word of this miracle spread like wildfire, demand skyrocketed. Egypt alone couldn't supply enough bodies, so opportunists actually started grave robbing fresh bodies directly from local European cemeteries just to keep up with the prescriptions. And honestly, ground-up mummies were just the tip of the iceberg here. The European medical establishment went all in on human remains. They prescribed blood, either liquid or powdered, for epilepsy. They used pulverized human hearts, livers, gallstones, and even, incredibly, oil distilled directly from human brains. What's truly crazy about this isn't just the sheer variety, but how long it lasted. This was consumed for centuries. Mumia was even actively listed in the Merck Medical Index, a highly respected medical encyclopedia, well into the 20th century.
Moving on to Section 2, coining the word cannibal. Let's dive into the surprisingly dark and highly political origins of the word itself.
So back in the 15th century, Christopher Columbus arrives on the island of Guadeloupe. At first, he reports back to the Queen of Spain that the indigenous people are friendly. But he mentions these completely unsubstantiated rumors about a group called the Caribs who allegedly raided, cooked, and ate their prisoners. Well, when the island completely failed to produce the gold Columbus was desperately looking for, he suddenly flips the script. He begins weaponizing those rumors, labeling anyone who resisted his plunder as a flesh-eating Caribe. By the 16th century, that word morphs into canibe, and eventually, in our modern era, cannibal becomes the catch-all term for anyone eating human flesh. Talk about a massive double standard, right? On one hand, you have Queen Isabella of Spain literally granting colonizers explicit permission to capture and enslave anyone who supposedly ate human flesh, based entirely on Columbus's self-serving rumors. Yet back at home, Europeans are avidly consuming stolen mummies, blood, and brain oil as everyday medical remedies. They were weaponizing these rumors to dehumanize indigenous populations abroad while essentially doing the exact same thing in their own pharmacies.
All right, Section 3, Survival and Cultural Norms. Let's shift gears away from weaponized labels and look at the verifiable reasons this actually occurred throughout human history.
When you hear the word cannibalism, this is probably what pops into your head. Survival cannibalism. It's exactly what it sounds like. Consuming the bodies of the already dead to avoid starving to death during catastrophic events. Think brutal famines, military sieges where food is completely cut off, or those ill-fated exploration expeditions that get stranded in the wilderness. The crucial takeaway here is that survival cannibalism is a desperate, tragic response to extreme starvation. It is completely distinct from cultures that normalize the practice under ordinary circumstances.
Which brings us to Section 4, Filial Cannibalism in China. This is a fascinating example of a normalized, socially accepted cultural practice with an almost 2,000-year written record.
So, filial cannibalism. This practice involved adult sons and daughters voluntarily offering a non-fatal piece of their own flesh, usually cut from the thigh or sometimes a finger, to be prepared as medicine for a severely sick parent. Notice how incredibly different this is from those Columbus rumors? This wasn't an act of savagery or violence. It was a deeply devoted, last-ditch attempt by a child to save the life of a beloved parent. It was seen as the ultimate, selfless expression of family loyalty.
Now, Section 5, Funerary Rites in New Guinea. We see a completely different cultural motivation when we look at the Fore people in the mid-20th century. For the Fore community, this practice was intimately centered around the grieving process. Family members would gather to lovingly consume the body of a loved one after death, specifically to honor the deceased's advanced funerary requests. It was a highly organized community practice born out of a profound desire to honor the dead, keeping them intimately close to the family even after they had passed on.
But here's where it gets heartbreaking. Tragically, these incredibly earnest acts of mourning ultimately spread a fatal neurological disease known as kuru right through the community. Because the disease was concentrated in the nervous system, the very families gathering together to pay their final respects were inadvertently exposing themselves to a deadly illness. It is a devastating intersection of profound cultural love and harsh medical reality.
Finally, Section 6, a complex history. As you can probably tell by now, painting this entire topic with a single, simplistic brush is basically impossible.
Let's just step back and look at the reality of what we've covered today. This is a history built on fictionalized stories and colonizer rumors explicitly designed to dehumanize and conquer. At the same time, it's driven by desperate human survival during terrible famines. It's rooted in beautiful familial devotion in China and intimate funerary mourning in New Guinea. Oh, and let's not forget, it was enthusiastically practiced as a highly profitable European medicinal craze for centuries. The truth is, people had been eating each other, volunteering to be eaten, and weaponizing false accusations against others for millennia. It spans a massive, complicated spectrum of human behavior.
So I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought. When you look at a history built on rumors used to justify the horrors of slavery, contrast that with wealthy Europeans casually consuming stolen mummies at the pharmacy, and then compare that to the desperate devotion of children giving up their own flesh to save a dying parent, you really have to ask yourself, who are the real cannibals? Thanks for tuning into this explainer. I really hope this journey has challenged everything you thought you knew about civilization, savagery, and the incredibly complex history of human survival. Until next time, keep questioning and keep learning.